Heather. I've been working in tech for almost half a century. I started programming when I was 16 in APL, and then I used S, and now I'm in my 60s and I occasionally work in R. And there's actually an interesting and deep continuity about that. In this talk, I'm going to share some things I've learned from almost half a century working as a woman in tech. And some of these things took me almost half a century to figure out. So maybe I can save you some time and some trouble. Not too long ago, I worked on a contract where some of my coworkers asked me why I was still working at my age, and if I was any good, why I was even there in that job. What can we learn from this, aside from the fact that sometimes people can behave like jerks? And that's something you probably knew already. I'm going to circle back to that at the end of this talk. But first, let me tell you about what a friend of mine used to keep on the back of his toilet 35 years ago. For a whole year, he put the Unix systems reference manual on the back of his loo to study it, not for compost, not for other purposes which you might be thinking about. Why? To be ready for his next move. And basically, this is a theme that I've seen over and over again, that being in tech actually isn't about knowing specific things, although that's useful. It's really about a commitment to continual exploration. And what we've seen in the last decade is that there's all these developments and platform services have empowered us to learn independently and to find and affiliate with people who have similar or complementary interests. And when I was getting back to work in my mid-50s after not working for almost a decade, this was a super big power up for me. And this need to keep up isn't actually a treadmill, because what you learn actually never really becomes obsolete. If you keep paying attention and if you keep engaging, it evolves, and you do too. So 30 years ago, I was doing HCI research, as it was called back then, and I really wanted to go into industry, but the opportunities weren't there in London. Actually, there were two jobs, one at System Concepts and one at Logica, and I didn't get either of them. So there were opportunities, but there weren't opportunities for me. So how I progressed in that situation really was just to keep exploring. I knocked on doors, I met people, I pitched multimedia projects, I pitched consulting services concepts about computer-supported cooperative work. That was all entirely unsuccessful. What worked? Answering an ad in a newspaper, the thing that's actually not supposed to work. And through that, I ended up getting into a fascinating career as a technology industry analyst, and that in turn led to many other opportunities. So now, after exploring pretty widely, working as a games analyst and a management consultant, I've ended up back where I started in HCI, doing user experience research. But here's the point: it hasn't really all been plain sailing. The wind changes, the world changes, the future is uncharted. Your goals are going to need to change in response to the changes that you see. And I'd say with hindsight, I think that if I'd really embraced the need to be adaptive, and that adaptation was actually a really important part of the work, I would have saved myself a lot of self-inflicted hassle. Another thing that I want to share with you is, that you probably kind of know, but I'd like to just remind you that tech isn't just for techies. I opened this talk talking about my programming experience, but in fact, where I'm sitting now in tech is doing what I call, kind of mischievously, really hardcore qualitative work. I like maths. I like computer science, but I could tell that like a new part of my brain lit up when I first used Mac Paint, and when I first engaged on Usenet and began to look at the rhetoric patterns of how people interacted with each other on it. So for me, what really excites me are the creative and the social applications, the peoply bits, the squishy bits. Your mileage may differ. That's perfectly okay. But there are lots of different ways of being in tech. And as software munches away, eating the world, those ways keep expanding. Certainly, don't be afraid to learn or to relearn the fundamentals, more than just code, the theory behind it. But don't be limited by that either. And don't listen to people who say there's only one way, even if they are on Twitter. If that's what they see, it's because their view is kind of limited. So Don't accept other people's certainties too easily. The world is wide and unpredictable. Okay, so I've talked about two really kind of nice and friendly things. One is that you need to keep exploring, and that the other is that territory to explore is continually changing, and that's an interesting thing. Um, there's a lot of really wide ways of engaging. Now, let's talk about what's really difficult. The elephant in the room. It's not fundamentally the technology that's difficult, it's the culture. When I was in grad school in the 80s, we noticed that seminar contributions from women were being ignored by some male teachers and by some male students. Even worse, they were ignored, and then when those ideas got restated by a guy, they got praised. Problem. You might even recognize this. Maybe this has even happened to you. Our solution here was to support each other. We made a pact to reinforce and to reference each other's contributions, particularly if they were ignored or reclaimed when restated by someone else, a guy type person. That worked. It made us happy. It made us contribute more. Probably didn't change the really kind of fundamental attitudes, but it worked for us to enable us to participate more readily and to feel happy to do that and to feel supported when we did that. So, really, it did work. Now, there's a mystery about missing women in computer science that goes back to the mid 1980s. And there really isn't a lot of agreement on what the root cause is. Was there a meteor that hit? Probably not. But the women are still missing from this field, particularly in the more technical ends of it. And just this, there's been big changes in what it means to work in tech. And the challenges for women in the field have evolved too. There's public and violent hatred against women who speak up, amplified by social media. You see this with politicians and with journalists. If you look up Gamergate, you'll see an extreme example of what can go wrong here. And on a less extreme, but I'd say more pernicious level, there's a kind of toxic positivity about product culture. It's also very easy to find online. As I was saying not long ago, I worked a contract where my colleagues couldn't believe that I could be any good if I was still working at my age, at that job. Where was my equity? Where was my yacht? Tech bro culture has like a really strong reality distortion field about how life works. What happened to me? I had three babies who were died before they were born. And then when I was 45, I had a baby who lived. These were facts of life and facts of death. They quite simply took priority for me. I'd say it hasn't been plain sailing, not just because I don't have a yacht. There was a continual need for me to replot my course according to circumstances. So what I'm saying here is you will need to create your own view of what your personal direction looks like. Product culture can be really naive. Don't be too willing to accept other people's views. Look at what you see and draw your own conclusions. To thrive, what works is to create allies who share your passions, your values, people who will watch your back. And there's one lesson that I only learned like embarrassingly recently, like it was only a few weeks ago, really, was to ask for help. That's not something I've done a lot of, but I tell you now, that's just a mistake I've made. It's a mistake I've made, so you don't have to. Do it. It's a good thing. So what am I saying here? I think I'm saying three things. One is that you really need to keep your situational awareness up because things change and you need to keep exploring and you might as well enjoy that. Another thing is really just not to limit your thinking about what being in tech is or who you ought to be. And finally, I'd say find allies, be an ally. Don't forget to ask for help and don't forget to give it. So you do you, and I wish you joy of your journey.